How old are you, sir? Near 20, if it please my lady. Dunk liked the ring of 20, though most like he was a year younger, maybe 2. No one knew for certain, least of all him. He must have had a mother and a father like everybody else, but he'd never known them, not even their names. And no one in Flea Bottom ever cared much when he'd been born or to whom. Are you as strong as you appear? How strong do I appear, my lady?
Hey everyone, Crowfood's daughter here, and if you click this video, you have reached the Disputed Lands. I'd like to thank everyone who came out for our last live stream that occurred on February 11th, and for those who missed it, there will be a link in the description down below. So today, we are going to take on a slightly different topic that I normally find myself doing. I've been conspiring with Joe Magician, and we are once again bringing you topics that complement each other. In today's video, we will be discussing our beloved Hedge Knight, Sir Duncan the Tall, and his possible connections to an ancient line of noble warriors descended of the first men. And that ancient line would be none other than that of House Strong. Now let's get started. So, House Strong. House Strong is an extinct noble house of the Riverlands that seemingly plays very little into the present storyline. But that wasn't so much the case several hundred years ago. If you stare back into history, you will soon realize it was once quite noteworthy. In fact, House Strong was at one point so prominent that it was Sir Osmond Strong who was named Hand of the King for Aegon the Conqueror himself after the death of Alton Celtigar. During the reign of King Jaehaerys, a Sir Lucamore Strong served on the Kingsguard, and Harrenhal was bestowed upon his brother, Bywin Strong, after the death of Rhaena Targaryen. And when we get to the Dance of Dragons, we see how Strong was assigned prominent roles on the small council, with Lionel Strong serving as Master of Laws and Hand of the King, and later his son Larys served as Master of Whisperers, while his other son Harwin was appointed Captain of the Goldcloaks and eventually became Queen Rhaenyra's sworn shield and rumored consort. In addition to the role House Strong played in early Targaryen history, this extinct house's significance likely goes back much further. Interestingly, Fire and Blood describes House Strong as being an ancient line of noble warriors boasting descent from the first men. The Riverlands chapter of the World Book coincidentally also mentions a hero named Artos the Strong. Now, something that our author does with several of the noble houses is provide them with characteristics that connect them to their name or sigil. For example, the Umbers are quite large. The Florents are known for their fox-like ears, the Lannisters for their hair of gold, and the list goes on and on. Well, as it so happens, House Strong most likely follows this very same pattern. You see, both Fire and Blood and the Rogue Prince describes Sir Harwin Strong as the strongest man in Westeros of the time. Similarly, Gregor Clegane is likely what would be considered the strongest man in the present timeline, and when he was resurrected, he was fittingly given the alias of a Strong, Sir Robert Strong. So, while Harwin Strong probably wasn't quite as large as the Mountain, with Harwin being the strongest man in Westeros, and the Mountain with a strong alias, it's not hard to draw comparisons. Additionally, Harwin's father, Lionel Strong, is described as a famed warrior and a big, burly man who enjoyed a formidable reputation as a battler and was often mistaken for a brute, even though he was quite intelligent. Lucamore Strong is likewise described in Fire and Blood as being a broad-shouldered blonde bull. So, it is safe to say the hallmark of House Strong was likely being very large and very strong, and because House Strong is a noble house of the Riverlands, it's very possible the hero, Artos the Strong, mentioned in the Riverlands chapter of the World Book, could likely be an ancestor or a progenitor of their line. So, from what we currently know, House Strong is an ancient line of noble warriors that was once quite prominent, and being very large and very strong in stature is most likely a recurrent physical feature of this noble house. Unfortunately, despite their past prominence, the history of House Strong is not completely untarnished. You see, there is a member of House Strong mentioned several times within the main series, the famous knight of King Jaehaerys' Kingsguard, known as Sir Lucamore Strong. In Fire and Blood, we are introduced to Lucamore when King Jaehaerys celebrates the completion of the Dragon Pit with a tournament, a huge event culminating in a grand melee, described as a clash of arms such as King's Landing had never seen before.
Other notables who joined the melee included Sir Alan Bullock, late of Dragonstone, Rhaegar Baratheon's brothers, Sir Boris, Sir Garron, and Sir Ronald, an infamous Hedge Knight called Sir Guile the Cunning, and Sir Alistair Rain, champion of the Westerlands and master-at-arms at Casterly Rock. After hours of blood and clangor, however, the last man left standing was a strapping young knight from the Riverlands, a broad-shouldered, blond bull called Sir Lucamore Strong.
Sometime after this melee, Sir Willem Wasp had died on a mission in Essos, which left an opening in the Kingsguard, and it was Lucamore's triumph at the Grand Melee which secured him a position on King Jaehaerys' Kingsguard.
So the matter was put to rest, and the fate of Sir Willem the Wasp was inscribed in the White Book of the Kingsguard. To fill his place, Jaehaerys awarded a white cloak to Sir Lucamore Strong, the victor of the great melee in the Dragon Pit.
Sir Lucamore was described as amiable, well-loved, and a favorite of the small folk. However, as it turns out, he was living a lie, and after nearly 20 years on the Kingsguard, his deception soon became known. Despite the Kingsguard members being bound by oath to take no wives and father no children, it became known that Lucamore had taken to wife 3 separate women, siring 16 children. This was quite the scandal, and Lucamore in turn received hefty justice. In response to these transgressions, Sir Lucamore of House Strong was castrated and sent to the wall for his crimes. In addition to this, Lucamore's 16 children were then declared bastards, as these marriages were not lawful, and his wives and children were sent away. According to Fire and Blood, the first of the wives, with her children, was given over to the charge of Lucamore's brother, Bywin, who had been raised to be the Lord of Harrenhal not half a year earlier. The second wife and her offspring would go to Driftmark to be fostered by Daemon Valerian, Lord of the Tides. The third wife, whose children were the youngest, one still on her breast, would be sent down to Storm's End. So, what we know of Lucamore's children is that they were all eventually relocated and spread throughout various regions. But in addition to this, because they were declared bastards, their identity as a Strong was lost, and they were henceforth known by their bastard names of Storm, Waters, and Rivers. And now, this is where it gets interesting. Despite House Strong being extinct in name, because Lucamore had left such a large legacy of children, it is very likely some remnants of this ancient bloodline of noble warriors may still remain. What is even more interesting is when we get to the tales of Dunk and Egg, we conveniently have a character who easily towers over the average man, described as nearly 7 feet tall, who has also pondered his parentage on more than one occasion. As we all know, Sir Duncan the Tall was a legendary knight who rose from humble beginnings. Through the tales of Dunk and Egg, we follow 2 unlikely companions through several adventures at what our author describes as various points in Dunk's career. As we follow Dunk through these adventures, we see his parentage is something that seems to eat at him.
"Egg," he said, "didn't you ever think that I might be a bastard?" "You, sir?" That took the boy aback. "You are not." "I might be. I never knew my mother or what became of her. Maybe I was born too big and killed her. Most like she was some whore or tavern girl. You don't find highborn ladies down in Fleet Bottom. And if she ever wed my father, well, what became of him then?" Dunk did not like to be reminded of his life before Sir Arlen found him. There was a pot shop in King's Landing where I used to sell them rats and cats and pigeons for the brown. The cook always claimed my father was some thief or cutpurse. Most like I saw him hanged, he used to tell me. But maybe they just sent him to the wall. When I was squiring for Sir Arlen, I would ask him if we couldn't go up that way someday, to take service at Winterfell or some northern castle. I had this notion that if I could only reach the wall, might be I'd come across some old man, a real tall man who looked like me.
Now, this passage is interesting. As we all know, after Lucamore's transgressions were discovered, he was dealt with harshly, castrated, and sent to the wall. In this passage, we see Dunk pondering his parents and who they were, and in doing so, he assumes he will find answers at the wall, at the very place Lucamore was sent to spend the rest of his days. Although the timeline would make it impossible for Dunk to be a son of Lucamore himself, his actual descent from Lucamore Strong is another matter. Another character, Brienne of Tarth, may also be giving us clues. You see, there is a long-standing theory that Brienne of Tarth may be a descendant of Sir Duncan the Tall. Our author has confirmed on more than one occasion that there are descendants of Sir Duncan the Tall present in the current timeline. During a 2005 Q&A session, our author was asked if he'll ever tell which character is Dunk's descendant. In reply, he simply stated, "I gave a pretty strong hint in the new book." Interestingly, that new book mentioned at the time was A Feast for Crows, and the strong clue the fans deduce would be none other than the coat of arms Brienne had painted on her shield.
"You did beautifully," she said, when the woman showed her the freshly painted shield. It was more a picture than a proper coat of arms, and the sight of it took her back, through the long years, to the cool dark of her father's armory. She remembered how she'd run her fingertips across the cracked and fading paint, over the green leaves of the tree, and along the path of the falling star.
In addition to this, in articles published by Vanity Fair and the online magazine The Word Zone, it is reported that our author had indeed confirmed this theory while attending the 2016 Balticon. So, in a sense, it's possible Brienne might also be a descendant of Lucamore, and her character might also be holding hints as well. Take for instance the shield Brienne had painted. The shield she had painted was one from the armory at Harrenhal, and Harrenhal just so happened to have been the seat of House Strong. So when Brienne does this, she is actually taking a Harrenhal shield and transposing the sigil of Sir Duncan the Tall directly onto it. How Brienne is introduced in the series may also be a clue. As previously mentioned, Lucamore Strong was introduced to us in Fire and Blood as being the victor of a great melee. a victory that later secured him a spot on the Kingsguard. Now, when we are introduced to Brienne, she is also taking part in a melee, which she also wins. And like Lucamore, this victory in the melee also leads to her appointment on a Kingsguard. In addition to Brienne's prowess and appointment paralleling that of Sir Lucamore, when we examine the character of Sir Duncan the Tall, we have a character who is not the best jouster, but from what we have seen, is undefeated when it comes to single combat. He is a brawler and is able to use his size and strength as an advantage in much the same fashion.
Dunk watched a server fill his wine cup. "I am better with a sword than with a lance," he admitted, "and even better with a battle axe. Will there be a melee here?" His size and strength would stand him in good stead in a melee, and he knew he could give as good as he got.
Like Lucamore and like Brienne, we also know Dunk was eventually also made a Kingsguard Knight and rose to the position of Lord Commander.
"I dreamed that you were all in white from head to heel, with a long pale cloak flowing from those broad shoulders. You were a white sword, sir, a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, the greatest knight in all the 7 kingdoms, and you lived for no other purpose but to guard and serve and please your king." He put a hand on Dunk's shoulder. "You have dreamed the same dream. I know you have." He had. It was true. The first time the old man let him hold his sword. Every boy dreams of serving in the Kingsguard. Only 7 boys grow up to wear the white cloak, though. Would it please you to be one of them? Me? Dunk shrugged away the lordling's hand, which had begun to knead his shoulder. It might, or not. The knights of the Kingsguard served for life, and swore to take no wife and hold no lands. I might find Tansel again some day. Why shouldn't I have a wife and sons?
Now, what is interesting in this passage is we are being given foreshadowing of Dunk's future, a knight of the Kingsguard. But in addition to this, when you look at the subtext, you also see Dunk pondering the very predicament Lucamore had found himself in, which is echoed in the sworn sword when Egg tells Dunk of his own aspirations.
"Did the potion work?" Dunk asked. "It would have," said Egg, "but I spit it out. I don't want a wife. I want to be a knight of the Kingsguard, and live only to serve and defend the king. The Kingsguard are sworn not to wed. That's a noble thing, but when you're older, you may find you'd sooner have a girl than a white cloak."
So once again, we see Dunk pondering the very predicament Lucamore had faced. Duncan the Tall is also given something of an inner mantra. It's something that Sir Arlen would tell him from time to time, and when Duncan is feeling hard on himself, it is repeated. Dunk the Lunk, thick as a castle wall. Of course, Lucamore the Lusty, as we all know, was sent to the most famous wall in the 7 kingdoms. But what I want to draw your attention to, and what may surprise you to learn, is that we have an actual Strong accredited with building actual castle walls. As it turns out, Osmond Strong was the hand of the king for Aegon the Conqueror, and was only known for doing one thing prior to the publication of Fire and Blood. And that one thing was literally building a castle wall. According to the World Book, it was Sir Osmond Strong and the Grand Maester who were given charge of building the wall around King's Landing. So we have Dunk the Lunk, thick as a castle wall, and we have Sir Osmond Strong, literally erecting castle walls. Lastly, what might be the strongest hint can be found in the way our author chooses his naming conventions. For example, in addition to Gregor Clegane, who takes on the alias of a Strong, there are also 2 supposed Strongs mentioned in the appendix of A Dance with Dragons. These Strongs are described as sergeants of the Golden Company, so their true heritage is unknown, as men in the free companies can call themselves whatever they choose. Whatever the case their descent may be, our author's choice of names for these two Strongs may be providing us with another clue. Sir Duncan Strong and Sir Dennis Strong. With Duncan Strong, the connection is pretty obvious. We have a man named Duncan with a surname of Strong. It's a pretty simple in-your-face correlation there. What may not be so obvious is Sir Dennis. You see, the name Duncan is actually an anglicized variation of Donked, a Gaelic name meaning a brown or dark, noble or chief. But that's not what's interesting here. Now, what is interesting is that Duncan is not the only variation of Donked. In addition to this, another variation also happens to be Dennis. So, in a sense, there is an intertwining naming convention tying both of these Strongs to the Duncan name. Now, when it comes down to it, with the knowledge that Lucamore Strong had left a large and anonymous legacy, it is very likely traces of the blood of House Strong can still be found within the Seven Kingdoms. And if there are any descendants that can be found within the series, the place to look would be Sir Duncan the Tall, a man who is defined physically by his profound size and strength, a man of questionable birth who ponders his parentage and feels he may find answers at the wall, a man who ponders the sacrifice of chastity when the subject of the Kingsguard is at hand, and who followed the footsteps of Lucamore and became a knight of the Kingsguard himself.
How old are you, sir? Near 20, if it please my lady. Dunk liked the ring of 20, though most like he was a year younger, maybe 2. No one knew for certain, least of all him. He must have had a mother and a father like everybody else, but he'd never known them, not even their names. And no one in Flea Bottom ever cared much when he'd been born or to whom. Are you as strong as you appear? How strong do I appear, my lady?
So who knows? While extinct in name, it's possible the blood of this ancient line of noble warriors of the first men may still be hidden in plain sight. Well, that about wraps things up for today. As mentioned previously, this video was done in collaboration with Joe Magician, as we once again decided to do videos that complement each other. So be sure to check out his House Strong video, which will premiere tomorrow, Saturday, March 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching!